all the creativity is, it's not making new things out of nothing. It's making new things out of old things. And so you take two things that no one's ever thought to connect before, and you connect them. And that's all the creativity and innovation is somebody goes, hey, I noticed this thing over here. If you plucked it out of that context and put it in this industry, it would completely change how that entire industry works. And fortunes are made and lost based on that kind of stuff.
Welcome to the Beyond Speaking podcast from Premier Speakers Bureau, featuring in-depth conversations with the world's most in-demand keynote speakers.
Hi, I'm Brian Lord, president here at Premier Speakers Bureau. Our guest today is Kyle Scheele. He's been called the patron saint of crazy ideas. Over the last decade, his projects have been featured in places like Fast Company, Wired, The Washington Post, Yahoo, BuzzFeed, UpWorthy, Goalcast, and many more. His videos have been viewed over 250 million times, and he's spoken to audiences all over the country. More than anything, he hopes that his story can inspire others to chase their own crazy ideas and become people they were meant to be. So Kyle Scheele, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, excited to be here.
You've been called the patron saint of crazy ideas. Where did that come from? Did you come up with it and kind of be like, hey, he's the great, or did that come from somewhere else?
No, that was a guy named Hugh Weber. Hugh is an incredible creative force himself. He runs The Great Discontent, and he actually was just recently named the creative in residence for Taliesin, which is Frank Lloyd Wright's house and workspace. And so the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, I think, has put him in charge of doing workshops and stuff there. Just an amazing guy. But where I think he came up with it was I've sort of over the years developed this pattern where I'll have some crazy idea and then I'll go, I'm going to do whatever it takes to make that happen and just see what comes out of it. And just over and over again, what's happened is those crazy ideas have led to just wildly outsized outcomes. So whether that was like, I hosted the world's first and largest fake marathon and 34,000 people signed up from around the world and we were in the Washington Post, or getting 37,000 audience members to sing Don't Stop Believing over the course of a tour that I was on and editing that together into this big video, or gaining 1 million TikTok followers in just like 25 hours. I went from having 17 followers to having 1 million followers. And it's just over and over again, it came out of me having an idea and chasing after that. And I think Hugh and other people have made similar observations that just seems to be the superpower that I have.
What was one idea that you were like, I'm going to try this, and it has almost no chance to succeed?
Oh, I would say almost all the ideas that have succeeded, I have not really understood necessarily why they succeeded. And I wouldn't have ever predicted that the ones that have gone big, I wouldn't have predicted that those would be the ones that would go big. My wife is the same way. She kind of laughs and she says, if I don't understand an idea that Kyle has, that is generally a sign that it'll probably do really well. Because there's some ideas that I have and she's like, this is dumb, no one's going to like this. And then that'll get like 16 million views or something. And so they all feel crazy to me. And I think that that's actually a really good thing for other people to hear. Like I talk about this in my speech that a lot of times an idea, whether it's a success or a failure, will teach you something. And often what it teaches you is that your window of possibility was way too small. And your thoughts about what was possible, you were just way off. And even creative people are like that. We often don't know which ideas are going to work or not work.
Yeah, and does your wife have that? So you're saying she has some that she doesn't think. Is that a good barometer? Has she ever thought any of them would work?
Oh, I think my wife just looks at me and just goes, what is going on in that guy's head most of the time? But over the years, like when we first got married, I mean, we had no money and no like free time to pursue these things. So my projects were a lot smaller, but then over time, I just sort of kind of kept pushing the envelope and going, can I try this? And she would go, I don't understand it, but go for it. And then it would turn into something big. And so I think the first like real example where she let me go kind of crazy was when I turned 30 and I decided that instead of having a birthday party, I was going to have a Viking funeral for my 20s. And I built a Viking ship that was like 16 feet long and 8 feet tall. And it had these big letters and numbers that said my 20s. And then I invited a bunch of friends over and we set it on fire. And she the whole time was like, this is the weirdest birthday party idea ever. But what it ended up leading to was this video that went viral. And then that led to another Viking ship where 21,000 people sent in their regrets to be burned. And that led to a book deal with HarperCollins. And like, it just one thing after another where the initial idea, and then if you drew a line to where it ended up, you would have never predicted that line because it was so much crazier than you ever expected. And I think both of us have just kind of learned, hey, you just got to try this stuff.
one of the more interesting things is like how this can actually transfer to corporate people listening. So you've got this like, well, okay, it's fine to do this at a birthday party or to, like a fake marathon or whatever it is. How does this translate to like a business audience?
Oh, you know what? I will say this. I understand where that question comes from because I've had that question myself. But over time, I have learned that it actually translates really, really well. So the first time I ever got asked to do a corporate speech was I was doing a speech in the youth market. I was speaking at like a high school conference, but it was put on by a company. And while I was there, this guy just runs up to me and goes, "Hey, what are you doing September 12th? And I was like, "I don't know." And he said, "I need you to come speak at this conference." And I said, "Who is it for?" And he said, "It's for a bunch of accountants." And I was like, "You haven't even heard me speak yet." Like I had just shown up. And he was like, "Dude, I was supposed to book somebody. I forgot to do it. Can you do it?" And so I said, "Yeah, man, what do you want me to talk about?" And he knew about my projects and stuff. He goes, "Just talk about that stuff." And I said, "Man, I'll do whatever you want, but these are accountants. They're not going to like this." And he was like, No, I think it'll be great." And I went and did it. It was the highest rated session at the entire conference. And then that client had me back to speak to their project managers conference and their executive assistants conference. And then I've taken that same message to nurse case managers and electrical contractors and realtors. And every time I think, I don't know if this audience will jive with this or whatever, I'm always blown away because I found is that everyone needs creativity, and that creativity is not just for, my weird birthday party projects or videos on the internet. Like creativity is good for all of us, and it's very good for business. In my talk, I go into why should you do this. And one of the first things I say is, you're not going to hear me say, you should chase crazy ideas because life is short. You're not going to hear me say you should chase crazy ideas because it's good for the human spirit. I believe both of those things. I think that those things are true, but I don't need to resort to that because I also think it's really good for business. That creativity, there's this quote from a guy named Bill Bernbach, and he literally kind of was Don Draper. He was like this ad man in the 60s and 70s. Like when he died, Harper said that like no one had contributed to creative work more than he had in like 100 years. And he had this quote where he said, "It may well be that creativity is the last unfair advantage we're legally allowed to take over our competitors." And I really like that because it's true. Like most unfair advantages go away over time. Either the government comes in and regulates and says, "Hey, you can't do this," or the market responds and that unfair advantage gets taken away. But creativity is the exception. When you think creatively and you out-innovate your competitors, it's allowed to stand, and you are allowed to keep that creative advantage. And it builds kind of a competitive moat. It keeps your competitors from being able to just immediately come in and gobble up whatever you've done. But it's not just good for business from a numbers side. It's also really good for business from a culture standpoint. What we're seeing with like Gen Z and millennials, and I'm a millennial, is that like the thing that we're allergic to more than anything in the world is being told just like to be a cog in a machine. Just said, "Hey, just do this job because I told you to." I have so many stories from people in my generation and the one behind who will say, "I went to my boss. I said, 'Hey, I've got this idea for how we could improve this process or how we could make this more efficient or how we could do this.' And the boss didn't even look from what he was doing. He just said, 'No, you know what? Just do it the way that I told you to do it.'" And instead, what they did was they went and started polishing up their resume. But when you instead invite people in, you say, "Hey, here's the objective that we're going towards. Here's the goal that we're trying for as a business. And we're open to any ideas that can get us there." Now people feel like, "Oh, I'm not just like a cog in a machine. I'm a valuable part of this organization and my ideas are taken seriously. And also, because it's an organization, my ideas are built upon by other people. They're made better than they would have been on my own, and they're resourced by the company. We're able to develop this stuff that I couldn't have done on my own." And so like the sum becomes greater than the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And that builds an organization where people just don't want to leave. Like, why would you ever want to leave a place like that where we're all better together? And that's because you've built a culture of creativity. So absolutely, I think this stuff applies to the business world as much or more than it applies anywhere else.
So one of the things you talk about is becoming an idea factory, how to turn yourself and your organization into an innovative machine. So I know you've just talked about a little bit of that. Is there any more legs that you can kind of give to that about how you share that with audiences?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously in a keynote, it's going to be a lot. There's a lot more information than we have time to get into today. But one of the sections that I have in my talk is called "The Things That an Idea Needs," and I believe that that there are certain things that, in the same way that you would cultivate a garden and you would say, "Hey, we need to make sure that these elements are here to make sure that we need the right amount of sun, we need the right amount of soil, we need the right amount of water." ideas are like that. You have to there are certain environments that they do well in. And there are several of these in the talk, but I'll give two really quickly here that every idea needs. First of all, every idea needs a chance. And second of all, every idea needs a home. And so what I mean when I say every idea needs a chance is this. If you do not believe that you are creative and you do not believe that your team members are creative, then you will find evidence for that. Warren Buffett one time said that the humans are great at one thing above everything else, and that is looking for information that confirms what they already believe. And so if you believe that you're not creative, then you won't come up with ideas and you won't notice ideas when they come. And the same thing is true of your team. We've all had the experience of you start driving a red Honda Civic and all of a sudden you see all the red Honda Civics on the road. That's because you had this new experience that you were a part of and you're like, oh, I'm noticing these things. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. And so when you tell it, hey, look for ideas, I want ideas, I value ideas, your brain will start to notice ideas more. So you have to give yourself a chance. And then the second thing is every idea needs a home. And basically what that means is that just an idea needs a place to live. And so for a person, oftentimes the simplest, maybe one of the best investments you can make for your business is to buy pocket notebooks for your team and just say, any idea that you have, write it down. Doodle in here. I don't care. Write notes during meetings, because what will happen is that pattern recognition will start to kick in. And when you start noticing ideas and writing them down and noticing things that are interesting to you and writing them down, your brain goes, oh, you like this stuff? Dude, I have tons of this stuff. I've just been throwing it out this whole time because I didn't think you were interested. And so those are just two really practical examples. And to abstract maybe just one layer out to talk about how ideas work. And again, this will be short because this is for a podcast, but all the creativity is, it's not making new things out of nothing. It's making new things out of old things. And so you take two things that no one's ever thought to connect before and you connect them. And that's all that creativity and innovation is somebody goes, hey, I noticed this thing over here. If you plucked it out of that context and put it in this industry, it would completely change how that entire industry works. And fortunes are made and lost based on that kind of stuff. All innovation is doing that. And so at a higher level, a way to be more creative is just to be exposing yourself to more creative things, to more, just a wider variety of things. One of the things that people said about Jim Henson, the creator of the Muppets, was they said the reason he was so interesting was because he was so interested. He was always interested in other people. He was always interested in learning about the world around him and watching weird documentaries and going to art museums and reading business books. And you just put all that stuff in and eventually your brain starts noticing connections, but you can't notice connections if you don't have those inputs in the first place.
Very true, very true. And speaking about remaking industries, the last, 3 years or so have just been crazy. Thinking inside the box, how tough times fuel true creativity and innovation is another one of your talks. How do you think the past 3 years have affected or changed how people approach creativity?
Well, I think that one, they've shown us, like I said at the beginning, that our window of possibility was way too small. There were so many things that happened during the pandemic that people had been trying to do for years, and everyone had said, no, that'll never work. Like the mass remote work. People had been asking to work remotely for years and years and years, and companies said it'll never work. And then all of a sudden it had to work, and we found, we can adapt. There are pros and cons. There are things that we lose. There are things that we gain. But nobody would ever have predicted that it would have been as successful as it was. And so that happened. And then I think a lot of things like that happened where people, all of a sudden, when you put someone into a situation where they have to be creative, they will be creative. They will find a way to innovate. People learn to use new tools that people who were like, I don't do technology. All of a sudden we're like, well, you have to. You got to figure this out to do your job. And they rose to the challenge. That talk that you mentioned about thinking inside the box, it comes from this idea that creativity actually thrives within constraints. And if I were to take you, Brian, and I said, okay, we're going to go to Hobby Lobby and you can buy anything in here. Any of this it's all free to you. And also across the street, there's a Home Depot, anything in there that you want. There's a welding supply store. There's a CNC machine, make me something. What you would do is you would kind of get paralyzed and overwhelmed, and you might spend the entire day just kind of walking around looking at options. Well, maybe I could do this, or maybe I could do that, or, but I haven't even thought about. But if I gave you a box of popsicle sticks and a thing of glue, and I said, you need to make a bridge that spans 18 inches and needs to hold as much weight as possible, and you have 45 minutes, at the end of 45 minutes, you would have something because you've constrained the outputs and the inputs, and you know what's happening. And so a lot of times people think, well, the time to be creative will be when the economy recovers, or when we hit this magical number of this thing, and then we can invest in innovation. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it, because where innovation comes from is resource constraint. One of the perfect examples of this, or two perfect examples, are prison and war. If you look at people in prison, they are innovative. Like, I have a book on my shelf over here of prisoners' inventions and the things that they invent. Sometimes they're weapons, sometimes they're cooking devices, sometimes they're it could be anything, but they are trying to solve a need in an extremely resource constrained environment. And then war is another one. You look at the people of Ukraine and how they responded to this invading force, and they said, okay, we're not trained for this. We've got to protect our town. So we're going to park all of our cars along the way. We're going to position people up there to divert the enemies. We're going to take down all the everybody just starts figuring it out because you have to, and you're in this resource constrained environment. And so I think that leaders who are looking at their teams and are looking at the future and saying, oh, let's maybe hold off. Let's wait until things get better. You're just going to get out innovated by someone else. Somebody else is going to come and eat your lunch because they're not waiting right now.
Yeah, and that is pretty fascinating. I was going to ask some of your favorite forced innovations there, and you gave us some beautiful examples. What are some examples that companies have done after they've heard you speak?
That's a great question. A lot of times it's individuals within the company, so either team leaders or people who are on teams. And what I want to do is kind of work at two levels. One, I want individuals to understand, here's how I can personally be more creative and bring more to the table. And then I want team leaders to go, here's how I can create a culture of innovation and a culture of creativity. And so directly after the speech is usually when I hear from the individuals who come up and they go, oh, these are the ideas that I have. And that's how I know that the talk worked, is when people come up and they don't go, hey, that story that you told about the fake marathon was great, or that story. I don't want people walking out going, oh, Kyle Scheele, he's incredible. I want them walking out going, oh, he sparked this idea that I had, or oh, this problem, I saw it in a new way. And so that happens all the time. I mean, I was at an event a couple weeks ago with a bunch of electrical contractors, and most of these are old white guys who have been doing this business for a long time, and the industry is starting to change. There's a couple of younger people in there, but none of them would have said, I'm a creative person. And I know because I talked to them afterwards. But then they walked out and these guys were saying, man, you made me see this idea in a new light, or this problem. And then this one woman walked up to me and she said, I had this idea for a children's book about an electrical eel who wants to become an electrician. And in the meeting, while I was talking, she pitched the idea to her boss. Her boss was like, we'll pay for it to get made and we'll give them out as client gifts to our clients. And I was like, that all happened during that talk? And she was like, yeah. And she was just lit up. And so that's kind of the stuff that happens in the room. And then what I also like is afterwards, when leaders will follow up and they'll say, hey, I've been bringing this to my team and we've started working through this. We've integrated some of these ideas into our one-on-ones or our meetups or our scheduled stuff. And sometimes that's once a week. Sometimes that's once a month. Sometimes that's at an offsite. But when they start to realize, hey, I have been leaving a lot of creative resources on the table by not asking for these things from my team, and now I'm going to change that. That's the biggest impact for me.
Something that I've seen a lot of, and I'm sure you have too as well, that switching gears a little bit, mental health has been a really big in-demand topic, and a lot of times it's mixed with something else. Leadership and mental health, teamwork and mental health, and you speak a lot on creativity and mental health. So can you share a little bit about your journey and how that applies in this sort of setting?
Yeah, so the mental health piece is interesting for me because I'm doing an event in a couple of weeks where I'm doing a talk about creativity, and then I'm doing a completely different talk about mental health. And the mental health talk is really here's how I survived long enough to be creative, because I kind of had a background when I was growing up. I think part of this is because I was creative. I for sure had undiagnosed attention deficit disorder and things of that nature. And I went to this private school, very kind of buttoned up, yes ma'am, no sir. I was bouncing off the walls. And so I spent a lot of my early elementary school days really feeling like I didn't fit in, feeling like I didn't have a place in this world. I had suicidal ideation at second and third grade. And then in fourth grade, this new kid showed up and completely changed my life because all of a sudden I had a friend, and I was not alone in the world anymore. And so that's the story I tell in that talk is about how the power of one person to make a difference. That so often in life we feel like we need all of these things are going to have to change before my life gets better. And we think, oh, like that's never going to happen. I remember feeling like that as an elementary school student, feeling like, well, before my life gets better, all these kids are going to have to leave and be replaced with kids who click with me. I've never met one kid like that. And then all these teachers are going to have to leave and be replaced with teachers who like really love it when a student is a giant distraction to the learning environment. That also doesn't feel very likely. And what I found was actually I was wrong about that. It actually only takes one person to make you feel like you matter. And in that talk, I sort of explore that it only takes one person to do most of the things that are worth doing in life. So most of the most powerful things that can be done and the most memorable things, the things that last, are done by one person. It takes one person to make you feel like you matter. It takes one person to make you feel like you don't. It takes one person to lift someone up or tear someone down. And so in terms of mental health within a company, a lot of times I like to share that message because I think it can be easy to feel like I'm only one person. I'm not the boss, or I'm not the CEO, or I'm only a division vice president. I'm not that, and you feel like I don't have the power to make a change. But the truth is most of that stuff 20 years from now, no one's going to remember, oh, at that date, who had what title or what role. What they will remember is, how did you make the people around you feel? Did you make them feel like they could talk to you? Did you make them feel like they were valued? Did you make them feel like they mattered? Or did you make them feel like they didn't? And those are little things that they're not hard. They're not expensive. It's just kind of the stuff that makes being a human being bearable and good. And I think that it's not that hard. And then when you do that, when you make people feel valued, then they bring their full selves. And that's where you get their creative energy. That's where you get all this stuff out of them because they feel seen and heard and welcomed and accepted.
That's awesome. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. And so thank you again, Kyle, for being here and sharing, sort of your mental health journey, as well as so much on creativity and innovation, and for being on the Beyond Speaking podcast. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for the Beyond Speaking podcast. To learn more about today's guest, visit premierspeakers.com. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen.